Hello, I'm Robert, a science blogger and voluntary fact in my spare time, and also a voluntary fact checker to help people scared of many things. And this time it's about the Great Reset. And the Great Reset is actually something very positive. It's from the World Economic Forum, but they have absolutely, there's a big conspiracy theory about it. They have absolutely no jurisdiction over the world. They can't tell countries to do things. It's just a forum to come up with ideas to help the world. And the COVID pandemic has shown how interconnected the world is, and it's shown up some of our vulnerabilities. Even the healthcare systems of the most wealthy countries, and they have vulnerabilities in them, as we saw. They weren't able to deal with the big surge of COVID cases. And the weaker economies were very potentially, they could have been a disastrous situation. Could easily have had a Great Depression. And we came together in a really quite remarkable ways to prevent a crisis from happening, a real crisis, a very much deeper than what actually happened. And the IMF's $1 trillion war chest was part of what war chest is part of what we used to do that. Those were low interest or zero interest loans and some outright grants to help countries that were struggling and could have really gone bankrupt basically during the crisis. And this is an example of the things that we've been doing. We are already becoming more resilient naturally through our response and working together in this way. And one example I took is the example of medical oxygen. So before the pandemic, many of the poorer countries had to import medical oxygen. They couldn't produce their own oxygen. And as a result, hundreds of thousands of children under 5 died of pneumonia, preventable pneumonia that could have been cured with the use of medical oxygen. Now, the World Health Organization could have just, for the duration of the pandemic, shipped lots and lots of bottles of oxygen to these countries so they could cope with COVID-19. But instead, they actually funded new oxygen concentration plants, which in the most remote areas are powered by solar power. And so now these countries can make their own oxygen. It's quite easy to make. It's not very high tech. You take it out of the atmosphere and you concentrate it. And the World Health Organization funded these oxygen concentrators for many countries in the world, which didn't have them before. So these countries now have these oxygen concentrators going forward into the future, and so they can now treat the young children who up till now were dying of pneumonia through lack of medical oxygen. So that's an example, and he talks about it there in the book. Dr. Tedros, I think he talks about it there in the press briefing. So it's something we could have solved many years ago. But the pandemic has brought us together, and we're now working together in ways we never have before. And the COVID vaccine is another example. The COVAX alliance to vaccinate the entire world at once, not exactly at once, a few months staggered, but in a few months from now, every old person in the entire world over 80, even younger than that I think, will have been offered the COVID-19 vaccine. And also all the health workers in the entire world will have been offered the COVID-19 vaccine. No matter where you are, if you're in the Sahel or something, if you're in the Congo, you will have been offered the COVID-19 vaccine. And nothing like this has ever happened before. So this is a really very positive thing for the future. So the idea of the Great Reset is simply what we're already doing, but making a deliberate attempt, a deliberate focus on building back better, on transitioning to a world where every country has a good health system, every country is able to use renewables and is able to insulate their homes if they need to, and they're able to recycle and able to look after the biodiversity in their country and to protect their nature services. And that's all it is. And it actually just turns out that this is an example of cacao trees. Actually, I've got a video about this anyway, I think. But there are many things that we depend on in the rest of the world, where we actually depend on the African economy. Chocolate. Our chocolate depends very significantly on the cocoa that is produced in Western Africa. And that's been protected because we work together to protect the economies of all countries. And it actually depends mainly on small farmers. And the Great Reset is about making these more resilient, everything more resilient. With those trees, then they are going to have problems with climate change. There's ways you can work with that to be more resilient, so that it's going to be less affected by climate change. That's one example. The cacao tree, they've had very little work on the actual on the improving the varieties of the trees. A lot of this it actually comes from South America, and there are many species there, much more variety than is used commercially, and this can be used to improve the crops. And so the thing is that the countries around the world they have to put a vast amount of finance in to restart the economy. That's called a stimulus. When you've had a recession, people have not been buying very much for a long time. The way to recover the economy as fast as possible is to make sure that lots of money goes into the economy. Lots of people are being paid a lot, so they can then use their wages to buy things, and then you get the whole economy starting up and kicking up and starting up again. And that's, for instance, Biden is going to be a very huge stimulus in the United States. That will help the US economy, but it will help the whole world. And also, stopping this pandemic will help the entire world. And that's another aspect of this this whole thing, is that they claim that the people who behind this conspiracy theory, they claim that the COVID-19 is man-made, and that is absolutely not true. It's not possible. It's in a tree with other viruses, and it's separated from SARS roughly around the year 1200. We know by just not from evidence from that time, but by the molecular clock and how quickly and slowly viruses drift when they mutate. And lots of other ones, the other ones that it's separated from, close relatives in bats. It's separated from them just a few decades ago in the second half of the 20th century. It's very much rooted in the natural diseases. It's not made, we can't make things like this. We actually literally can't do it. And this was a disease that sadly hit China very badly to start with, but China got over it very quickly. China told the rest of the world how to stop this disease. And the countries that followed China's example, Taiwan is one of the best examples, and Taiwan has never had a lockdown and only had 500 cases through the entire pandemic. And we could have all been the same if we'd paid as much attention to the advice that China was giving to the rest of the world, and then the World Health Organization, as to how to cope with this pandemic and how to stop it. So no, there isn't any conspiracy, and many countries, for instance, why would a conspiracy leave New Zealand free of the virus? What's special about New Zealand? Why are they free if there's this vast conspiracy to put everyone under lockdown and then use that to reset the world economy? Then why did they leave out New Zealand? The reason is because there isn't a conspiracy. Jacinda Ardern is not conspiring with all the other world leaders to introduce a man-made virus to the world in order to restart the economy. That's not what happened. What happened was that Jacinda Ardern she listened to science, and we do know how to stop it. She followed the science very well, communicated to her people, and that's why New Zealand is over very quickly. And Taiwan has an epidemiologist, or had an epidemiologist as the vice president or something. I can't forget his rank, but he was very high in the government, and he directed their response. They also had previous experience of SARS, and that's why they stopped it so quickly before it even got anywhere. That is the pattern around the world. The countries that listen to science and regard it and don't argue politically with science, but instead take the science and then make executive decisions based on that, they're the ones who have been able to end this pandemic quickly in their countries. And a fifth of the world already has ended it completely. So this doesn't fit with the idea that it was an art. Why would you create a disease, and then the idea is to, I mean, it's a bizarre idea. I've a really, really, really crazy idea. Anyway, so now, that is basically that. That's what the Great Reset is, and so it's talking about how we use the stimulus checks or the stimulus money, and they say what you should do is to use investment and incentives for renewables, for better insulated homes, for preserving rather than destroying nature services, and things like that. And the economists say this is the best way, no matter, even if you have absolutely no interest in renewables, even if you don't believe in climate change, even if you have no interest in preserving biodiversity, these things are still the best way to restart the economy, because they employ lots of people, and they get these people employed in creating something of lasting value to your economy. And it turns out that that is the way to stimulate a strong recovery that keeps on and on, if what you are creating is of lasting value. If, for instance, you were to use the stimulus money to employ lots of people to build some gigantic monument or something which has got no economic value except perhaps possibly for tourists to come and look at it, then that would also create a stimulus in the short term, but it would be a very short-lived stimulus. Just for the people then would spend all their wages that they were given to build this giant monument, and that's the end of it. And they're really doing nothing very useful. If you get these same number of people to build a renewables power plant, a solar power plant, or to install renewables on everybody's roof, or things like that, then that's going to be providing electricity for your economy for 30 years or more. And so you get a multiplier effect. And when you want to recover from a recession, then according to economists, look for things with this multiplier effect. So you need to stimulate the economy and then try to stimulate it in ways that will have this multiplier effect that is also rebuilding back and building a stronger economy. Not only that, renewables make it more resilient, because with the current fossil fuels that we have, then we discovered that during the pandemic, that when the prices went down, the fossil fuels had to shut down because they just couldn't go below a certain price, because they have to pay out for the fossil fuels, and there's a limit to how low they can go, because otherwise they're losing money. And renewables are much more resilient, because they just, whatever they sell is paying off the cost of constructing renewables. There's very, very little overhead in keeping a wind turbine or solar plant going. A little bit of servicing every year to look at it, make sure everything's working. You don't need any fuel. And there are many other overheads for fossil fuels. For instance, the United States has to spend billions of dollars to protect the oil tankers, and you don't need that with renewables. So you're building back a much better, stronger, more resilient economy in this way as well. And the same way, if you preserve biodiversity, then long term that's a much better, stronger economy you've got there than one in which you, over short term, you use the stimulus checks to destroy your own biodiversity. That is not a sensible way of using the stimulus. So that's what the Great Reset is about. That's all it is. And it is not the World Economic Forum can't tell the European Union or Biden in the United States to build back better, or the United Kingdom. I'm in the United Kingdom, and Boris Johnson is going to build back better. Indeed, Prince Charles of the United Kingdom was one of the people involved in this whole thing. And I've not been told by anyone to do that. It just makes economic sense. And so this is just a buzzword for something that makes a lot of economic sense. And there's nobody's got any authority to force anyone to do this. But very fortunately, it's really good, I think. So we have the EU, we have the United States, we have the United Kingdom, we have, and Africa is very keen to build back better, as you can understand. And they want to use some of the stimulus money, for instance, for the Great Green Wall of that's to build back this is rather stagnated. This is the idea of stopping the way the Sahara Desert is encroaching on Africa, on sub-Saharan Africa, by planting, and not necessarily planting a forest as was original plan, but grassland trees and some trees here and there, whatever is needed in order to keep it green, and building back in a way that is of economic value to the inhabitants. So that's another way. Reversing desertification has obviously got huge long-term effects. It's a very strong multiplier effect if you use the stimulus to stop and reverse desertification. So again, that's what the Great Reset is all about. And so I hope this helps you. And oh yes, then there's the other thing, a video that keeps on being shared, and that is the I've read the World Economic Forum, and it says, "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy." Well, this is not from the World Economic Forum itself, even though the video is hosted on their website. And this particular video, it's from their kind of advisors, who people who serve for a year, or I think it's a year, in order to as a kind of a think tank that puts input into the World Economic Forum. They don't actually, they obviously have, the World Economic Forum has no sway on anything, but they don't say what the World Economic Forum's plans are, or anything like that, or ideas or suggestions are. And so these are just input to them. And so this Danish MP, she said that she looked at the trend in which things are already going in our country, and it's towards more rental and less ownership. That's what she saw. And then she extrapolated that and said, in 2030, what if there's gone all the way and we rent everything? And you own nothing because you rent everything. Now, she's not saying anybody's going to make you rent everything. She's just saying we are renting so many things more and more. What happens if we end up renting nearly everything? And she asked us to ask the question, do we want to go there? And that's all that was. That's all it was, just someone asking a question. She says here in author's note, some people have read this blog as my utopia or dream of the future. It is not. It is a scenario showing where we could be heading, for better and for worse. I wrote this piece to start a discussion about some of the pros and cons of the current technological development. When we are dealing with the future, it is not enough to work with reports. We should start discussions on many new ways, and this is the intention with this piece. So that's what that was about, which is again something some people have got scared about. So anyway, hope this helps you all to be a little bit less scared about this whole thing. I'll upload it.